The crisp sound of skin striking skin silenced the first-class cabin. 17-year-old Marcus Washington's cheek burned red as flight attendant Karen Winters towered over him, her face contorted with disgust. All he'd asked for was water. Passengers gasped, smartphones recording the shocking moment. With remarkable composure, Marcus made one quiet phone call. Minutes later, the captain announced they were returning to the gate immediately. Karen smirked, assuming victory, completely unaware her career and freedom would soon vanish faster than the altitude they were losing. How could a simple request for service escalate into a battle that would expose America's darkest prejudices? Before we dive into this shocking story of injustice and vindication, let me know where you're watching from. If you believe everyone deserves equal treatment regardless of skin color, hit that like button and subscribe to stay updated on similar stories of justice prevailing against all odds. Marcus Washington had always been exceptional. At 17, his brilliance in artificial intelligence had already secured him early admission to Stanford University with a full scholarship, despite having a father who could buy the entire campus without blinking. Elijah Washington, a self-made tech billionaire who had clawed his way up from a childhood in the projects of Detroit, had taught his son that excellence was the minimum expectation, not a goal. The world sees black success differently, Elijah would remind Marcus during their Sunday chess matches at their Silicon Valley estate. What they praise in others, they'll question in you. What they excuse in others, they'll condemn in you. But Marcus, bright-eyed and optimistic, believed his generation was different. His academic achievements, impeccable manners, and genuine kindness had always seemed to transcend racial boundaries among his peers. "Dad, people see what you accomplish first," he would counter, moving his bishop strategically across the board. "The color thing becomes secondary when you prove yourself." Elijah would only smile sadly, knowing his son had yet to experience the world's full harshness. The trip to Stanford was meant to be a celebration before Marcus began classes in the fall. A chance to tour the campus, meet professors, and begin the transition from prodigy to professional. The Washington family's private jet was undergoing maintenance, forcing them to book first-class tickets on a commercial flight, something they rarely did. "Consider it a learning experience," Elijah had told Marcus. "I'll join you tomorrow after my board meeting." This would be Marcus's first solo trip, a small step toward independence. When Marcus arrived at the airport, dressed in clean, dark jeans and a simple navy button-down that probably cost more than most people's entire wardrobes, he navigated security with practiced ease. At the gate, the boarding agent did a double take when checking his first-class ticket, asking to see his ID twice. Marcus brushed it off as thoroughness. Boarding the plane, he noticed the flight attendant's eyes widen slightly as he showed his boarding pass for seat 2A. "Are you sure you're in first class?" she asked, looking him up and down. When Marcus confirmed politely, she checked his boarding pass against his ID. "This is unusual," she muttered, not quite under her breath. An older white businessman behind. Marcus sighed impatiently. "Just let the kid through so we can all get seated," he grumbled. The flight attendant reluctantly stepped aside. As Marcus settled into his leather seat, he couldn't help but notice the sideways glances from other passengers. A middle-aged white couple across the aisle whispered to each other, stealing glances in his direction. The woman clutched her handbag, a little tighter when Marcus reached into the overhead bin to store his backpack. The silent message was clear: "You don't belong here." Marcus took a deep breath, remembering his father's words. "Your dignity is non-negotiable. Never let them see it affect you." While other first-class passengers were immediately offered pre-flight beverages and warm towels, Marcus sat waiting, invisible to the cabin crew. After 10 minutes, he gently raised his hand to get attention. The senior flight attendant, a woman with artificially brightened blonde hair and a name tag reading Karen Winters, walked past him twice before acknowledging him with a tight smile. "I'll be with you in a moment," she said, before assisting an elderly white man who had just sat down after Marcus. The subtle hierarchies were becoming increasingly clear. When Karen finally returned, her smile didn't reach her eyes. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone suggesting he was inconveniencing her. "May I have some water, please?" Marcus asked politely. She nodded curtly and returned several minutes later, placing the water on his tray without a word, spilling a few drops on his sleeve. Throughout the boarding process, Marcus observed her warmly chatting with other first-class passengers, learning their names, asking about their destinations. No one asked about his. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Marcus sent a quick text to his father. "You were right. Sometimes excellence isn't enough." Then he switched his phone to airplane mode, unaware that this flight would teach him more about the real world than any classroom ever could. Have you ever been treated differently because of how you look? Can you imagine being constantly questioned about whether you belong somewhere, even when you have every right to be there? This is the reality Marcus Washington faced as Flight 2577 reached cruising altitude. Karen Winters had been flying with National Airways for 22 years. She prided herself on providing exceptional service to the right kind of first-class passengers, the ones who earned their way there. In her mind, that meant executives, celebrities, and dignified older travelers, not teenagers with attitude who didn't appreciate the privilege. She had never explicitly acknowledged her biases, but they guided her actions nevertheless. When she'd seen Marcus board, something inside her immediately bristled. She couldn't quite explain it, but she felt certain he didn't deserve to be there, that he must have somehow gamed the system. As drink service began, Karen deliberately skipped Marcus's row, serving everyone else in first class. When Marcus politely raised his hand again, she pretended not to see him. A white businessman across the aisle noticed the obvious slight. "Excuse me. I think this young man has been trying to get your attention," he said, gesturing to Marcus. Karen's smile tightened as she turned to Marcus. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't see you there," she said, her tone making it clear she had. "Could I please have some orange juice?" Marcus asked, his voice steady and polite despite the growing knot in his stomach. He was using his extra polite voice, the one his father had taught him to use in situations where he might be perceived as threatening just for existing. Karen returned with the smallest glass on her cart, filled halfway with juice. "We're running low," she explained, though Marcus noticed the white businessman received a full glass immediately after. Throughout the next hour, the pattern continued. During meal service, Karen accidentally skipped Marcus until he spoke up again. When she finally brought his meal, she practically dropped it on his tray, causing the sauce to splatter onto his shirt. Marcus discreetly began recording these interactions on his phone, keeping it partially hidden. Other passengers were noticing too. An older white woman across the aisle caught Marcus's eye and gave him a sympathetic look. A few rows back, another black passenger, an older man in a business suit, watched the situation with a grim expression of recognition. The tension reached its breaking point when Marcus's water glass was empty for over 40 minutes. Despite pressing the call button twice, Karen ignored him. Finally, when she passed by his seat again, Marcus spoke up. "Excuse me, may I please have some more water?" Karen stopped abruptly, turning to face him with barely concealed annoyance. "You know, this button," she said loudly, pointing to the call button, "isn't for you to summon me whenever you want. First class isn't just about pressing buttons and making demands." The cabin grew quiet as passengers turned to watch the interaction. Marcus, aware of all eyes on him, responded calmly. "I'm sorry if I've done something wrong. I just needed some water, and I did press the button twice." Karen's face flushed red. "Listen, I don't know how you got in this section, but first class has certain standards. It's not just about having a ticket." A few gasps could be heard around the cabin. Marcus felt his heart racing, but kept his expression neutral. "I believe I have the same right to service as anyone else in this section," he said quietly. That's when Karen snapped. "Don't you dare talk back to me about rights," she hissed, her voice rising. "You people always think everything is about discrimination. Maybe if you acted like you belonged here." And then it happened. As Marcus began to respond, Karen's hand shot out, slapping him hard across the face. The sound echoed through the suddenly silent cabin. Phones immediately came out, recording the aftermath. Marcus sat stunned, his cheek stinging, as Karen seemed to realize what she'd done. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down. "He was being aggressive," she announced to the shocked cabin. "I felt threatened." Do you believe there's ever an excuse for a flight attendant to physically assault a passenger? Comment 1 if you think Karen should have been immediately fired, or 2 if you think there might be more to the story. Hit the like button if you've ever witnessed or experienced discrimination in a situation where you should have been treated with respect and dignity. And make sure to subscribe to hear how this shocking moment of racial profiling escalates into a nationwide battle for justice. What do you think happens next after a billionaire's son gets publicly assaulted? The answer might surprise you. The cabin froze in stunned silence. Marcus touched his cheek, feeling the heat where Karen's hand had struck him. Around him, passengers sat with mouths agape, several recording the incident on their phones. Karen stood over him, her initial shock quickly hardening into defiance. He was being aggressive, she repeated loudly, though the recordings would show nothing but Marcus's polite requests and calm demeanor. With a composure that belied his 17 years, Marcus didn't raise his voice or return aggression. Instead, he calmly reached for his phone. "I'd like to make a call, please," he said quietly. Karen scoffed. "We're at 35,000 feet. Good luck with that," she retorted, clearly believing her authority in the aircraft was absolute. What Karen didn't realize was that National Airways, like many premium carriers, offered satellite phone service in first class. Marcus connected quickly, the line ringing just 3 times before being answered. "Dad," he said, his voice finally betraying a slight tremor. Something's happened. In his San Francisco office, Elijah Washington was in the middle of a board meeting when his private line rang. He rarely answered during meetings, but seeing it was Marcus, he excused himself immediately. As Marcus described the incident in precise, measured tones, witnesses would later recall seeing the tech billionaire's expression transform from concern to cold fury. He asked his son 3 questions, listened carefully to the answers, then simply said, "It's handled. Stay calm." Elijah Washington hadn't built a technology empire worth $80 billion without cultivating powerful connections. Within minutes, he had the cell phone number of National Airways CEO Robert Keller, who was playing golf in Scottsdale. Elijah's message was simple. "Your employee just assaulted my minor son in front of dozens of witnesses on Flight 2577. I'm giving you one chance to handle this correctly before I dedicate my considerable resources to ensuring your airline becomes synonymous with racial discrimination. Check your email for the video that's about to go viral." Simultaneously, Elijah dispatched his chief legal counsel to the airport and activated his team of public relations specialists. As one of the few black billionaires in America, Elijah had unfortunately needed to develop a comprehensive protocol for responding to racial incidents. Operation Shield was now in full effect. Aboard the aircraft, Karen had retreated to the galley, speaking intensely with the other flight attendants. Marcus sat quietly, aware of the sympathetic and curious glances from other passengers. And so, older black woman moved to the empty seat beside him. "Are you all right, young man?" she asked gently. "I'm a doctor if you need medical attention." Marcus thanked her but assured her he was physically fine. Approximately 17 minutes after Marcus's call, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've been instructed to return to our departure gate immediately. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened." The announcement sparked murmurs throughout the cabin. Karen emerged from the galley, a triumphant smile playing at the corners of her mouth. She approached Marcus's seat, leaning down to whisper, "Looks like someone's getting removed from the flight. Maybe next time you'll learn to respect authority." Her confidence suggested she believed the system would automatically work in her favor, as it had countless times before. When the aircraft reached the gate, the door opened to reveal 2 airline executives in suits, accompanied by airport police officers. Karen straightened her uniform and adopted a professional demeanor, clearly expecting to provide her account of why the troublesome passenger needed removal. "Karen Winters?" one of the executives called out, his voice tight with controlled anger. Karen stepped forward confidently. "Yes, I can explain everything. This passenger was being aggressive and—" "Ms. Winters, please collect your personal belongings and come with us immediately," the executive interrupted. You are suspended pending investigation, and these officers need to speak with you about the assault allegations." The color drained from Karen's face. "What? But she sputtered, pointing at Marcus. "The incident was recorded by multiple passengers in the aircraft's security cameras," the second executive explained coldly. "The CEO has viewed the footage himself. Please don't make this more difficult than it already is." As Karen was escorted off the plane, several passengers broke into spontaneous applause. The captain announced that there would be a slight delay as they arranged for a replacement flight attendant, but that they would be departing again shortly. A new senior flight attendant approached Marcus, offering sincere apologies and ensuring he had everything he needed for the remainder of the flight. What none of them realized yet was that the videos were already spreading across social media platforms, gaining thousands of views per minute. By the time Marcus landed in San Francisco, Justice for Marcus would be trending nationwide, and what began as a simple request for water would ignite a firestorm that would expose how deeply racial bias was embedded in American institutions, even for the son of a billionaire. By the time Flight 2577 touched down in San Francisco, the slapping incident had erupted across social media like wildfire. The hashtag #Justice for Marcus was trending #1 on Twitter, with the video accumulating over 2 million views in just 3 hours. Multiple angles captured by different passengers showed the same undeniable truth: a black teenager being assaulted for merely requesting water after being repeatedly ignored. As Marcus descended the jetway, he was met by his father's chief security officer, a former Special Forces operator named Jackson, who quickly ushered him through a private airport exit to avoid the gathering media. Elijah Washington had arranged for his son to be brought directly to the family's Palo Alto compound while he managed the rapidly escalating situation. "Are you okay?" Elijah asked the moment Marcus arrived, embracing his son tightly. Despite his billions in this moment, he was simply a father whose child had been harmed. "I'm fine, Dad," Marcus assured him, though the emotional weight of the public humiliation was beginning to sink in. "But something you said keeps playing in my mind, about how the world sees black success differently." Elijah nodded grimly. "That's why we're going to handle this differently. Not quietly, not with private settlements. The world needs to see what happened to you, because it happens every day to people without our resources to fight back." National Airways' initial response came 5 hours after the incident, a tepid statement posted to their social media accounts. "National Airways is aware of an incident involving one of our flight attendants. We take all passenger concerns seriously and are conducting a thorough investigation. We strive to provide exceptional service to all our customers." The corporate non-apology only fueled public outrage. Within an hour, the airline's social media accounts were flooded with tens of thousands of comments demanding Karen's termination and calling for boycotts. Celebrities and influencers began sharing the video, amplifying its reach exponentially. Civil rights organizations issued statements condemning the airline's handling of the situation. By evening, media vans had gathered outside the Washington estate and the National Airways headquarters. CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News all led their broadcasts with the story, though with notably different framing. While some focused on the clear racial element of the incident, others questioned whether there was more to the story or speculated about what might have provoked the flight attendant. Internet sleuths quickly identified Karen Winters, finding her social media accounts and exposing posts that revealed a history of racially insensitive comments. Her address and personal information began circulating online, leading to concerns about vigilante justice. The pilot and other flight attendants from the flight were also identified, with pressure mounting for them to speak out about what they witnessed. At 8 p.m., Elijah Washington held a press conference alongside his legal team and representatives from the National Coalition for Racial Justice. Standing at the podium with the composure and command that had made him a tech industry titan, Elijah spoke directly to the cameras. "Today, my son Marcus experienced what millions of Black Americans face daily, being treated as if he doesn't belong in spaces he has every right to occupy. Despite being a straight-A student bound for Stanford University, despite traveling in, first class on a ticket purchased legally, he was subjected to persistent discrimination culminating in physical assault. The assault was not just by an individual, but represents a systemic failure of an organization that clearly never trained its employees to see a young black man as deserving of basic human dignity. Elijah continued, his voice steady but tinged with controlled anger. National Airways has a choice to make. They can admit their failure, implement real, measurable changes in their training and corporate culture, and make proper amends to my son. Or they can face a lawsuit that will expose every instance of racial discrimination in their company's history. I have the resources and the determination to ensure this incident becomes a turning point in how corporations handle racial bias. As Elijah spoke, National Airways' stock price began dropping in after hours trading. Major institutional investors were calling emergency meetings, concerned about both financial and reputational damage. The airline's CEO, Robert Keller, was forced to cut short his golf vacation and return to headquarters for crisis management. Late that night, Marcus received a direct message on his private social media account. It came from Karen Winters. You ruined my life with your race-baiting victimhood. Your father's money won't protect you forever. Some people are already seeing through your act. Then came links to several right-wing blogs already spinning alternative narratives, questioning Marcus's character and suggesting the video had been misinterpreted. What Marcus didn't know yet was that Karen had just been contacted by Connor Phillips, executive producer at America Right News and close friend of several National Airways board members. We can help each other, Phillips had told her. You've been unfairly vilified. Let me tell your side of the story. The next morning, as Elijah's legal team prepared to file their lawsuit, National Airways reached out with a settlement offer, $5 million in exchange for a non-disclosure agreement and a joint statement declaring the matter resolved. When Elijah showed the offer to Marcus, the teenager didn't hesitate. They want to buy our silence, he said, his young face hardened with new wisdom. But this isn't just about me anymore. Elijah smiled proudly at his son. That's exactly right. Some things are worth more than money. He instructed his attorneys to decline the offer and proceed with the lawsuit. Neither of them realized that this decision would make them targets of a coordinated campaign that would test their resolve, their reputation, and ultimately, their safety. Have you ever wondered how powerful people fight back when they're exposed? What lengths would someone go to in order to protect a system of privilege? The battle for justice was just beginning, and Marcus was about to learn how deep discrimination truly runs. Connor Phillips sat in his corner office overlooking Manhattan, watching the Washington press conference with a scowl. As executive producer of America Right News and heir to the Phillips Media Group fortune, he represented the third generation of a family that had built wealth by catering to a specific demographic's fears and biases. At 57, his silver hair and tailored suits gave him an air of distinguished authority, masking his ruthless tactics and deeply held prejudices. This is getting out of hand, he muttered to his executive assistant, another entitled minority playing the race card to shake down a corporation, and everyone's falling for it. What particularly irked Phillips was that Elijah Washington had achieved success despite the systemic barriers Phillips believed should keep people like him in their place. A black billionaire with real influence threatened the social hierarchy Phillips was dedicated to preserving. Get Karen Winters on the phone, he instructed, and contact our friends at the National Airways Board. It's time to change the narrative. Within 24 hours, a counteroffensive was launched. Karen Winters appeared on America Right News in a softball interview, tearfully claiming she had been the victim of an aggressive, entitled teenager who had verbally abused her and made threatening movements. I was scared for my safety, she sobbed. He kept demanding things, ignoring proper procedures, and when I tried to explain airline protocol, he became hostile. The video only shows the end of our interaction, not what led to it. Phillips's network aired doctored versions of the viral video, slowed down, and zoomed in to suggest Marcus had made threatening gestures. Legal experts on their panels questioned whether Karen's actions constituted assault at all, suggesting it might have been reflexive self-defense. Other segments focused on the growing problem of false racism accusations and the weaponization of social media mobs. Meanwhile, Anonymous accounts began flooding social media with manufactured stories about Marcus. Supposed former classmates claimed he had a history of aggressive behavior. A fake teacher account alleged he had cheated on exams. Old photos of Marcus were manipulated to place him in compromising situations. Within days, searching for Marcus Washington brought up a mix of the original incident and these fabricated controversies. Death threats began arriving at the Washington home. "Go back to where you came from" was spray-painted on their security gate. Marcus's phone was bombarded with hateful messages from anonymous accounts. When he checked social media, he found thousands of new comments calling him a spoiled rich kid who was playing the race card. Behind the scenes, Phillips activated his network of corporate contacts. National Airways executives received calls from major advertisers, subtly suggesting they would face backlash if they caved to the mob. Board members with connections to Phillips' other businesses were reminded of those relationships. The airline's legal team began receiving research dossiers claiming to show Marcus's pattern of problematic behavior. Then came the most devastating blow. Stanford University's admissions office contacted Elijah Washington with concerning news. In light of recent character concerns raised about Marcus Washington, the university is placing his admission under review, pending further investigation, the letter stated bureaucratically. When Elijah called the admissions director, a long-time acquaintance, the man sounded uncomfortable. "I'm sorry, Elijah, but we've received dozens of complaints, including some from major donors threatening to withdraw funding. We have to take these allegations seriously." Marcus was devastated. His dream of attending Stanford, of following in the footsteps of tech innovators he admired, was suddenly in jeopardy over a fabricated controversy. "But they haven't even talked to me," he said, his voice breaking as he read the letter. "How can they make decisions based on internet rumors?" "Because the system is designed to doubt people who look like us," Elijah explained gently. "Excellence isn't enough when powerful forces decide you're a threat." National Airways executives, sensing the shifting winds, privately reached out to Elijah again. "This could get very messy," their general counsel warned during a tense phone call. "Mr. Phillips has considerable influence, and frankly, sir, even with your resources, this kind of battle can become quite unpleasant. We're prepared to increase our settlement offer substantially." Elijah's response was firm. "My son was assaulted because of his skin color. If you think I'll be intimidated into silence, you fundamentally misunderstand who I am and what I've overcome to get here. What's your take on powerful media figures who use their platforms to protect discrimination?" Comment number 1, if you believe truth should always prevail over powerful interests. Comment number 2, if you think Marcus and Elijah should have accepted the settlement to avoid this escalation. Hit the like button if you've ever seen how quickly falsehoods can spread when powerful people feel threatened. And subscribe to see how the Washingtons fight back against a system designed to silence them. The question remains, how do you battle an enemy willing to destroy everything you've worked for? The next part of this story will show just how dirty this fight is about to get. The email from Stanford University's Dean of Admissions arrived at 8:17 a.m., its formal language masking the devastating impact of its content. After careful consideration of recent events and allegations that have come to our attention, Stanford University has made the difficult decision to rescind Mr. Washington's admission. While we value diversity and inclusion, we must also uphold the highest standards of character and conduct expected of Stanford students. Marcus read the email 3 times, each word cutting deeper than Karen's slap ever could. His entire future, meticulously planned and earned through years of relentless work, collapsed in a single paragraph of corporate doublespeak. When Elijah found him sitting motionless in the home library, clutching his phone with tears streaming silently down his face, no words were needed. "They didn't even investigate," Marcus finally whispered. "They didn't interview a single person who actually knows me. They just gave up on me because it was easier." Elijah put his arm around his son's shoulders. Despite his billions, despite his power and influence, in this moment he felt the same helplessness he'd experienced decades ago as a young black man trying to secure his first business loan. "This isn't the end," he promised Marcus. It's not even the beginning of the end. But it is the end of me trying to fight this system from within its rules. As news of Stanford's decision spread, it validated the narrative Phillips had been crafting. If even prestigious Stanford deemed Marcus problematic, perhaps there was truth to the allegations. Major news outlets that had initially reported sympathetically began hedging their coverage with phrases like growing controversy and conflicting accounts. The psychological toll on Marcus intensified. Once outgoing and confident, he became withdrawn, jumping at notifications on his phone, flinching when cars drove by their home too slowly. Sleep eluded him as his mind replayed not just the slap, but the subsequent character assassination that proved more damaging than the original assault. "Maybe we should have taken the money," he said one night over a dinner he barely touched. "At least then it would be over." "That's exactly what they want," Elijah replied firmly. "For people like us to learn that resistance is futile, that our dignity has a price tag." While Marcus struggled, Elijah was fighting battles on multiple fronts. Phillips' network had expanded its campaign, now targeting Washington Technologies, with accusations of fraudulent business practices and security vulnerabilities in their products. Major clients were receiving anonymous dossiers urging them to reconsider their relationships with the company. Government contracts were suddenly delayed for additional review. The stock price had dropped 18% in a week. During an emergency board meeting, several directors urged Elijah to settle the airline case privately. "This isn't just affecting you anymore," the CFO argued. "Thousands of employees depend on this company's stability. We've lost nearly $3 billion in market value already." Elijah stood firm. "If I abandon this fight, I send a message to every employee who looks like me or my son that they're expendable when things get difficult, that their dignity is negotiable." The board reluctantly backed him, but the pressure was mounting. Even some prominent black business leaders privately suggested Elijah should compromise. "Choose your battles," advised a fellow tech CEO during a confidential call. "You can do more good with your foundation and influence intact than by dying on this particular hill." What these well-meaning advisors didn't understand was that for Elijah and Marcus, this had transcended a single incident. It had become a referendum on whether true equality existed even for those with every possible advantage. If a black billionaire's son could be assaulted, then have his reputation and future destroyed for seeking justice, what hope was there for black Americans without such resources? Hope emerged unexpectedly when 3 former flight attendants contacted Elijah's legal team. Each described similar incidents involving Karen Winters and passengers of color, all quietly settled by National Airways with strict confidentiality clauses. "They protect her because acknowledging the pattern would open them to massive liability," explained one whistleblower. "I quit rather than be complicit, but most people can't afford to lose their jobs." This evidence of a systemic problem should have strengthened their case, but Phillips's campaign had already poisoned the well of public opinion. When the whistleblowers were named in legal filings, they faced immediate backlash, including death threats and harassment. 2 withdrew their statements, citing concerns for their families' safety. The final blow came when Phillips leveraged his relationship with Senator William Hartman, chair of the Commerce Committee, to announce congressional hearings into social media defamation and corporate extortion. While carefully avoiding specific names, the press release made clear that the Washington case would be the central focus, painting Elijah as a powerful billionaire using his resources to bully a struggling airline and a working-class flight attendant. As Marcus watched news coverage of the announcement, seeing commentators debate his character and motives without ever having met him, something inside him broke. "I can't do this anymore," he told his father, his voice hollow. "Every day it gets worse. My life is being destroyed in front of the whole country, and for what? Because I asked for water and expected to be treated like a human being?" That night, Elijah found Marcus in the bathroom, staring vacantly at an open bottle of sleeping pills. He hadn't taken any, but the mere consideration terrified Elijah more than any business crisis ever had. He immediately arranged for top psychiatric. Karen moved the family to their secluded lake house property, away from the media circus their home had become. As Marcus began therapy, Elijah made a decisive strategic shift. Fighting in the court of public opinion had proven disastrous, against an opponent willing to use disinformation and intimidation. It was time to change the battlefield. The Washington family compound in the remote forests of northern Washington state had been designed as a sanctuary, a place of peace and reflection far from the demands of Elijah's business empire. Now it served as a fortress, its state-of-the-art security systems and isolated location providing physical and psychological safety as they regrouped. 3 weeks had passed since they'd withdrawn from public view, allowing Phillips and his allies to claim victory. Headlines like "Washington family disappears amid mounting allegations" and "Billionaire abandons discrimination claim as evidence crumbles" dominated news cycles briefly before the world moved on to fresher controversies. For Phillips, the matter appeared settled. Another potential threat to the status quo neutralized. But within the compound's secure walls, far from prying eyes and ears, a different story was unfolding. Elijah had assembled an elite team of crisis managers, civil rights attorneys, digital forensics experts, and former intelligence operatives who shared a common trait: unwavering integrity and a personal understanding of racial injustice. "For too long, we've been playing defense," Elijah told the assembled team in the compound's conference room, "responding to their attacks, trying to correct their lies after they've already spread. That ends today. Marcus deserves justice, and to get it, we need to change everything about our approach." Marcus, still recovering but regaining his natural resilience, sat beside his father. The psychological support and distance from the public eye had helped him regain perspective. "I want to be part of this," he insisted. "Not just the victim in the story, but active in finding the solution." The team's first breakthrough came when their digital forensics experts traced the coordinated social media attacks to a network of accounts managed by a little-known subsidiary of Phillips Media Group. The subsidiary, Strategic Opinion Management, marketed itself as a reputation consulting firm, but essentially functioned as a disinformation factory, creating and amplifying customized narratives for clients willing to pay their exorbitant fees. "They created over 2,000 fake accounts to spread lies about Marcus," explained Zoe Chen, the lead digital investigator. "We've documented everything, including internal communications, showing they knowingly fabricated evidence." Simultaneously, their legal team had been quietly deposing former National Airways employees, building a comprehensive case file of racial discrimination incidents systematically buried by the company. Karen Winters had been involved in 17 documented incidents, all settled quietly with passengers of color who lacked the resources to fight protracted legal battles. In each case, the airline had protected her despite clear evidence of misconduct. "The pattern is undeniable," confirmed Maya Rodriguez, their lead civil rights attorney. "They knew they had a problem with this employee and chose to enable her rather than address it. That's textbook corporate liability." The most damning evidence came from an unexpected source, a junior executive at National Airways, troubled by the company's handling of the situation, anonymously provided internal emails showing that airline management had viewed the unedited security footage before making any public statements. They had known from day one that Marcus had done nothing wrong and that Karen had indeed assaulted him without provocation. "They lied knowingly," Elijah said grimly as he reviewed the documents. "Not just remained silent, but actively participated in smearing a 17-year-old assault victim to protect their brand." As their case strengthened behind the scenes, Marcus found purpose in creating something new. Drawing on his technology skills, he began developing a secure platform where victims of discrimination could document their experiences, connect with others facing similar issues, and access resources for seeking justice. "I keep thinking about all the people who experience what I did, but don't have a billionaire father to fight for them," Marcus explained as he showed his father the prototype. "What if we could give them the collective power they need? A community that believes them, tools to document incidents properly, access to pro bono legal help." Elijah beamed with pride at his son's resilience and vision. "You're not just thinking about your own justice anymore. You're thinking systemically. That's how real change happens." Their carefully constructed counteroffensive was nearly ready when the security breach occurred. Despite the compound's sophisticated systems, an intruder penetrated the perimeter. One night, leaving a single message spray painted on the side of the main house. Not even billions can protect you. Security footage showed a masked figure who clearly had inside information about blind spots in the surveillance system. The invasion of their sanctuary shook Marcus deeply. "They found us even here," he whispered, the hard-won progress in his recovery temporarily faltering. "How far will they go?" Elijah's response was not fear, but cold, focused resolve. "They just made their biggest mistake," he said quietly. "They've turned this from a legal battle into a personal one, and they have no idea what I'm willing to do to protect my son." The breach accelerated their timeline. The next morning, Elijah made a single phone call to their team. "Execute everything. Now." Have you ever witnessed someone push too far? Someone who finally decides that playing by the rules that were designed for their failure is no longer an option? What happens when those with power and resources refuse to accept the unjust status quo? The Washingtons were about to show the world exactly what that looks like. The counterstrike began not with a press conference or public statement, but with precision strikes at multiple vulnerabilities in the opposition's infrastructure. Elijah Washington had built his fortune by understanding systems, finding their weak points, and either strengthening them or exploiting them. Now he applied that same analytical brilliance to dismantling the forces aligned against his son. First came the financial pressure. Washington Technologies announced a new corporate ethics requirement. Any financial institution managing the company's substantial assets or handling its banking would need to certify they had no business relationships with companies under investigation for racial discrimination. The announcement didn't mention National Airways specifically, but the implication was clear. Within hours, the airline's 3 largest lenders received calls from their risk management departments, suddenly concerned about their exposure. Simultaneously, Marcus launched his platform, Justice Documented, with an initial database of over 500 verified incidents of discrimination on National Airways flights. Each case was meticulously documented, with signed affidavits and supporting evidence. Former employees spoke on record about the culture of bias they had witnessed or been forced to participate in. The site crashed repeatedly in its first day as millions of visitors flooded in, many contributing their own experiences. "This isn't about public shaming," Marcus explained in a video introduction on the platform. "It's about transparency and accountability. Corporations need to know that burying incidents one by one isn't an option anymore. The truth has a home now." The Washington legal team filed an expanded lawsuit, now including RICO charges against both National Airways and Philips Media Group, alleging a coordinated conspiracy to defame and silence discrimination victims. The filing included hundreds of pages of evidence showing how Philips's strategic opinion management had created false narratives not just about Marcus, but about dozens of other discrimination plaintiffs over the years. "What we've uncovered is essentially a professional victimization service," explained lead attorney Maya Rodriguez at the press conference announcing the suit. "When powerful entities are caught discriminating, they hire Philips's organization to destroy the credibility of those seeking justice, allowing the discrimination to continue unchecked." Perhaps most devastating was the release of Philips's offshore financial records, obtained through methods Elijah's team wouldn't specify. The documents revealed millions of dollars flowing from National Airways to shell companies ultimately controlled by Philips, with payments coinciding precisely with racial discrimination incidents the airline needed to suppress. The apparent quid pro quo destroyed any claim that America Right News had been providing objective commentary on the Washington case. Philips responded with predictable outrage, calling the allegations a desperate fabrication by a failing billionaire. But his usual confident bluster seemed hollow, as financial regulators announced they were reviewing the offshore transactions for potential legal violations. Major advertisers, wary of association with the growing scandal, began quietly pulling their spots from America Right News programs. Karen Winters, seeing the tide turning, attempted to recant her allegations against Marcus, claiming she had been pressured and misled by Philips's team. "They told me what to say, how to cry at the right moments," she admitted to a journalist who had gained her trust. "I did discriminate against Marcus, and I did slap him. I've done similar things to other passengers of color, and the airline always protected me. I'm deeply ashamed, but I was scared of losing everything if I didn't play along with Philips's Plan. As the evidence mounted, Stanford University's president personally called Elijah to report that the admissions committee had unanimously voted to reinstate Marcus's acceptance, with a full apology for their failure to properly investigate the allegations. "We allowed ourselves to be manipulated by powerful interests," the president admitted. "It's a failure of our institutional values that will require significant remediation." Marcus, having evolved through his trauma, responded thoughtfully, "Apologies are meaningful only when accompanied by systemic change. I'll consider returning to Stanford when I see concrete policies to ensure this never happens to another student." The Washington counterstrike had succeeded beyond expectations, forcing accountability from institutions that had assumed they were beyond reach. National Airways stock had dropped 40%. Phillips faced potential criminal investigations. Karen Winters had become a cooperating witness against her former protectors. Justice seemed within reach. Then Phillips made his desperate final move. As Marcus left a medical appointment in downtown Seattle, accompanied by a single security guard, 3 men in tactical gear forced their vehicle off the road. Security camera footage would later show Marcus being dragged from the car, fighting desperately as he was forced into an unmarked van that immediately sped away. 3 hours later, Elijah Washington received a text message from his son's phone. "End this now or you'll never see him again. Do you think there's a point where fighting for justice becomes too dangerous? Comment number 1 if you believe standing up against discrimination is always worth the risk. Or number 2 if you think the Washingtons should have prioritized their safety over exposing the truth. Hit the like button if you're inspired by Marcus creating a platform to help others facing discrimination. And make sure you're subscribed to find out how Elijah responds to this terrifying escalation. Would you risk everything to save someone you love? The most shocking part of this story is still to come. Elijah Washington had faced countless crises throughout his journey from poverty to billionaire status, but nothing had prepared him for the hollow devastation of his son's kidnapping. For the first time since his meteoric rise, he found himself truly powerless, trapped between justice and survival. The kidnapping made national headlines immediately. Security footage of Marcus being forcibly taken went viral, generating public outrage that transcended the previous divisions. Even commentators who had questioned Marcus's original claims expressed horror at this escalation. "Find Marcus Washington" became the top trending topic worldwide, with celebrities and political figures joining the calls for his safe return. "We're facing a terrorist now, not a businessman," concluded Jackson, Elijah's security chief, as they gathered in the crisis room established at Washington Technology's headquarters. "Phillips has crossed from character assassination to actual violence. He's desperate." The FBI had taken charge of the investigation, with agents combing through Phillips's communications and movements. Despite the resources deployed, 24 hours passed with no solid leads on Marcus's whereabouts. The kidnappers had gone silent after their initial message, leaving Elijah in agonizing uncertainty. Then came an unexpected development. Karen Winters contacted Elijah's team directly, bypassing law enforcement. "I know where they might have taken him," she said, her voice trembling with fear and resolve. "Phillips has a compound in rural Idaho he uses for strategic retreats. I overheard him mentioning it as a place where problems could be solved without interference." Karen's information provided the first real lead. "Why are you helping us?" Elijah asked her directly during a secure call. "Because this was never supposed to go this far," she replied, her voice breaking. "I was racist. I was wrong to discriminate against your son. I deserve to lose my job, but I never signed up for kidnapping and whatever they're planning to do to him. This isn't about saving my career anymore. It's about stopping something unforgivable." As federal agents mobilized toward the Idaho location, Elijah received another message from the kidnappers. "Withdraw all allegations against Phillips and National Airways, publicly admit the fraud, or we release evidence of your son's criminal hacking activities." Attached was a manufactured video appearing to show Marcus illegally accessing government databases. "They're setting him up for federal charges," explained Washington Technology's chief security officer. "If you cave to their demands, Marcus avoids kidnapping charges but gets framed as a hacker. If you don't, they'll claim he was never kidnapped but was hiding from prosecution." Elijah made the hardest decision of his life. "We don't negotiate," he announced to his team. "We continue full exposure of Phillips's organization, while the FBI handles the rescue. Marcus would never want me to abandon this fight, even for him." The raid on Phillips's compound occurred at dawn. FBI tactical teams found sophisticated computer equipment and evidence of the manufactured hacking videos, but no sign of Marcus. Initial disappointment turned to hope when forensic techs discovered Marcus had left almost imperceptible markers in the computer system, a technique he had developed during cybersecurity training with his father's company. The hidden code translated to coordinates for a secondary location. "He found a way to leave us breadcrumbs," Elijah realized, a surge of pride temporarily cutting through his fear. Even in captivity, he's fighting back. The second raid was successful. Marcus was recovered from an underground bunker, physically battered but alive and defiant. 4 suspects were arrested, including 2 former military contractors with ties to Phillips's security team. The evidence recovered from both locations provided investigators with direct links between Phillips and the kidnapping operation. While Marcus recovered in a secure hospital unit, public sentiment shifted decisively. Media outlets that had previously given credence to Phillips' narrative now scrambled to distance themselves from him. National Airways issued a statement, severing all ties with Phillips Media Group and announcing a comprehensive review of internal policies regarding discrimination. Stanford University's president personally visited Marcus in the hospital, not only to reaffirm his admission, but to announce a new scholarship program for minorities affected by documented discrimination, to be named in Marcus's honor. "Your courage has forced us to confront uncomfortable truths about how institutions respond to power and pressure," the president acknowledged. Marcus, still bearing the physical and psychological wounds of his ordeal, received these developments with newfound wisdom beyond his years. "Institutions only change when continuing their old patterns becomes more painful than transformation," he observed to his father from his hospital bed. "We made discrimination expensive for them. That's the language they understand." As Marcus began his recovery, the platform he had created, Justice Documented, exploded in growth. Thousands of discrimination victims found their voice, many speaking out for the first time about experiences they had previously buried out of fear or hopelessness. Major corporations, seeing the consequences National Airways faced, began proactively reviewing their practices and reaching out to settle past incidents. The Washington family emerged from the crisis transformed. Marcus had lost some of his youthful idealism, but gained a deeper understanding of systemic injustice and the courage required to combat it. Elijah, already a successful businessman, had discovered a new purpose that transcended wealth accumulation. Together, they prepared to use their platform and resources to ensure that Marcus's suffering would create lasting change. But Phillips was not finished. As federal investigators closed in and his media empire began to crumble, he executed his final desperate gambit. Using his remaining contacts in law enforcement, he arranged for Marcus to be arrested on fabricated computer crimes charges the moment he was released from hospital care. The image shocked the nation's conscience. 17-year-old Marcus Washington, still bearing visible bruises from his kidnapping ordeal, being led from the hospital in handcuffs. Federal agents from a specialized cybercrimes unit had arrived, with an arrest warrant alleging that Marcus had hacked into protected government databases and stolen classified information. "The timing makes the political motivation obvious," declared Elijah at an emergency press conference outside the federal courthouse. "My son has just survived a kidnapping orchestrated by Connor Phillips, and suddenly he's arrested on fabricated charges before he can even testify about his abduction. This is retaliation, plain and simple." Despite Elijah's resources and connections, the federal charges complicated matters significantly. The judge assigned to Marcus's case, Harold Whitmore, denied bail, citing the serious nature of the alleged crimes and potential flight risk due to the defendant's extraordinary financial resources. Judge Whitmore, investigative journalists would later discover, had received substantial campaign donations from Phillips Media Group subsidiaries during his election. While Marcus was held in a juvenile detention facility, separated from his father and support system, the charges against Phillips for orchestrating the kidnapping faced unexpected delays and procedural hurdles. Evidence mysteriously became misplaced. Witnesses reported intimidation. The prosecutor initially assigned to the case was suddenly transferred to another jurisdiction. "We're seeing the system protect its own," observed civil rights attorney Maya Rodriguez during a strategy session with Elijah. "Phillips has spent decades cultivating relationships with judges, prosecutors, and politicians. He's calling in every favor to obstruct justice and keep Marcus isolated." The Black community's response was immediate and powerful. Prominent leaders organized peaceful protests outside the courthouse and detention center where Marcus was held. Social media campaigns highlighted the contrasting treatment between Marcus and white juveniles accused of similar or worse offenses who had received bail. Religious leaders held prayer vigils and called for justice. Frustration mounted as weeks passed with Marcus still detained and Phillips still free. The Justice Documented platform became a central organizing hub, with users coordinating letter-writing campaigns to elected officials and maintaining public pressure. Academics and legal experts published analyses demonstrating statistical evidence of racial disparities in the criminal justice system's handling of the case. During a particularly large protest outside the courthouse, tensions escalated when police in riot gear unexpectedly moved in to disperse the peaceful crowd. What began as a non-violent demonstration devolved into chaos as officers deployed tear gas and rubber bullets against retreating protesters. News cameras captured disturbing images of excessive force used against unarmed citizens, including elderly community members and clergy. The violent response to peaceful protesters shifted public opinion dramatically. Outrage transcended racial and political lines as Americans witnessed the disproportionate response to people simply demanding fair treatment under the law. Congressional leaders called for investigations into the police action and the handling of both Marcus's case and the charges against Phillips. Inside the detention facility, Marcus found unexpected allies. Other detained youth, many also victims of systemic inequality, recognized him from news coverage and offered protection and support. Marcus, in turn, began informally teaching computer skills and sharing knowledge about rights and resources. Even in confinement, his natural leadership and compassion emerged. Elijah, meanwhile, focused his considerable resources on a two-pronged strategy: securing Marcus's release and exposing the corruption that had allowed Phillips to manipulate the justice system. His legal team filed motions challenging Judge Whitmore's impartiality and petitioning for a change of venue. Simultaneously, private investigators documented connections between Phillips, the judge, and key figures in the prosecutor's office. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Karen Winters, continuing her journey from perpetrator to ally, agreed to testify not only about the original discrimination incident, but about conversations she had witnessed regarding Phillips's broader strategy of judicial manipulation. Her testimony before a grand jury included specific dates, locations, and participants in meetings where Phillips had boasted about his influence over certain judges, including Whitmore. "I was present when Phillips specifically stated that if legal challenges ever threatened his interests, he had friends in black robes who would ensure favorable outcomes," Karen testified. "He mentioned Judge Whitmore by name, saying he was an investment that keeps paying dividends." Karen's testimony provided the basis for a judicial misconduct investigation and renewed motions for Marcus's release. Public pressure intensified as the evidence of corruption became impossible to ignore. Finally, the Department of Justice announced it was taking over both cases, the charges against Marcus and the kidnapping charges against Phillips, citing significant concerns about local handling and potential conflicts of interest. A new federal judge ordered Marcus released to home confinement with electronic monitoring while the investigation continued. After 42 days in detention, Marcus walked out of the facility to a crowd of supporters. Thin and subdued but unbroken, he embraced his father before addressing the gathered media. "The system isn't broken," he stated calmly into the forest of microphones. "It's functioning exactly as designed, to protect power and punish challenges to the status quo. My experience is unusual only because I have the resources to fight back. Thousands of others face this same injustice without billionaire parents or national attention. They are who we should be fighting for." As Marcus settled into home confinement, Phillips made his final desperate move. Karen Winters, the key witness against him, disappeared the night before she was scheduled to give, her formal deposition. Her apartment showed signs of struggle, and her phone was found smashed in the parking lot. Surveillance cameras had been disabled precisely 20 minutes before the estimated time of her abduction. The message was clear. Phillips would destroy anyone who threatened him, even from the shadows of his crumbling empire. "I'm done playing defense," Elijah Washington announced to his assembled team 3 days after Karen Winters' disappearance. "Every time we react to Phillips's moves, he's already planning his next attack. It's time to end this permanently." The team gathered in the reinforced sub-basement of Washington Technologies headquarters, included legal experts, digital security specialists, former intelligence operatives, and civil rights strategists. Marcus participated via secure video link from their home, where he remained under court-ordered monitoring. "What are you proposing?" asked Jackson, the security chief who had become Elijah's most trusted advisor through the crisis. "I'm going to bet everything," Elijah replied, his expression resolute. "My fortune, my company, my reputation, all of it leveraged to expose not just Phillips, but the entire system that enables people like him to weaponize discrimination and corrupt justice." The plan they developed was breathtaking in its audacity. Washington Technologies would create a specialized subsidiary dedicated solely to investigating corruption in the judicial system, with an initial focus on documented cases of racial discrimination. Elijah would personally fund it with $10 billion, nearly half his total net worth, placed in an irrevocable trust. "This isn't a charitable foundation that can be disbanded if things get uncomfortable," Elijah explained. "Once launched, it continues independently, even if I'm ruined, financially or otherwise neutralized. Phillips needs to understand that destroying me won't stop what's coming." Simultaneously, Marcus developed a brilliant legal strategy from his confined state. Rather than simply defending against the hacking charges, he and the legal team prepared a comprehensive RICO case documenting decades of Phillips's manipulation of the justice system. Every judge, prosecutor, and official who had received benefits from Phillips's network would be named. Every case where justice had been obstructed would be reopened. "We're not just fighting my case," Marcus explained. "We're creating a template for systematic exposure of judicial corruption that can be replicated nationwide." As these initiatives took shape, Karen Winters' situation grew increasingly dire. Despite an intensive search by federal authorities, no trace of her had been found. Elijah dedicated substantial private resources to the search, hiring specialists with experience in hostage recovery and missing persons cases. "She's the linchpin witness who can connect Phillips directly to both the discrimination cover-ups and the judicial manipulation," Maya Rodriguez reminded the team. "Without her testimony, much of our case is circumstantial." The breakthrough came from Marcus, whose electronic monitoring had restricted his movements, but not his intellect. Working within the constraints of his house arrest, he applied his programming skills to analyze patterns in Phillips's properties and movements. Using publicly available data combined with information gathered by their investigators, Marcus identified an abandoned industrial property registered to a shell company, 3 levels removed from Phillips's known holdings. "This location fits the pattern of isolation and security Phillips prefers," Marcus explained, highlighting the property on digital maps. "It's remote enough for privacy, but close enough to his primary residence for convenient access. And it was purchased through the same elaborate ownership structure he used for the compound where I was held." Federal agents raided the property, finding Karen alive but traumatized in a soundproofed basement room. Her captors had fled shortly before the raid, apparently tipped off about the impending law enforcement action. Though physically injured and psychologically shaken, Karen remained determined to testify. "He wanted me to record a statement claiming I had fabricated everything about Marcus's discrimination and Phillips's involvement," she told investigators from her hospital bed. "When I refused, they escalated to physical coercion. They recorded everything, showing me the video afterward and saying they would release it to supremacist groups if I ever testified against Phillips." Despite the threats, Karen made the courageous decision to proceed with her testimony. "I've spent too many years being part of the problem," she explained to Elijah when he visited her in the hospital. "Whatever happens to me now, I need to do this one right thing." With Karen's safety secured, the final phase of the Washington strategy unfolded. Using advanced encryption techniques developed by Marcus, they unlocked a trove of digital evidence recovered from the various Phillips properties. The decrypted files contained damning recordings of Phillips explicitly discussing the manipulation of judges, the fabrication of evidence against Marcus, and the coordination of the kidnapping operation. Most shocking was a recorded conversation between Phillips and Judge Whitmore, in which they explicitly discussed ensuring Marcus's detention regardless of the evidence. The Washington boy needs to learn that even billionaires have to respect the natural order, Phillips could be heard saying. Make sure he stays locked up until he's broken. Whatever rulings you need to make, I'll provide the cover. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. As federal prosecutors prepared to present it in court, Phillips made increasingly desperate attempts to suppress the recordings, claiming attorney-client privilege and national security concerns. When those efforts failed, he attempted to flee the country on a private jet, only to be apprehended at a small airfield outside Washington, D.C. The stage was set for a final courtroom confrontation that would expose the full scope of corruption and discrimination that had targeted Marcus and countless others before him. What no one anticipated was that Phillips, facing the collapse of everything he had built, would resort to one last act of violence in a desperate attempt to silence the truth. The United States Courthouse in Washington, D.C. stood as a monument to justice, its neoclassical columns and grand facade projecting permanence and impartiality. On this crisp autumn morning, however, the building had become the epicenter of a case that challenged the very foundations of American justice. Security was unprecedented, with federal marshals, local police, and private security forces creating concentric rings of protection around the facility. Inside courtroom 3A, every seat was filled as Judge Imani Johnson, specially appointed by the Supreme Court after the recusal of multiple judges with Phillips connections, called the proceedings to order. The consolidated cases before her included the charges against Phillips for kidnapping, witness tampering, and racketeering, as well as the government's motion to dismiss all charges against Marcus Washington. Marcus sat beside his father at the plaintiff's table, his posture straight and dignified despite the electronic monitoring bracelet still attached to his ankle. At 17, he had endured public humiliation, kidnapping, imprisonment, and character assassination, yet emerged with a profound sense of purpose rather than bitterness. Across the aisle, Phillips sat with his legal team, his once imposing presence diminished by orange prison attire and the visible weight loss of his pretrial detention. The proceedings began with the prosecution's motion to dismiss all charges against Marcus. Your Honor, the government acknowledges that the evidence allegedly supporting the charges against Mr. Washington was fabricated, stated federal prosecutor Jamila Richardson. Further investigation has revealed that this fabrication was orchestrated by the defendant Phillips as part of a coordinated effort to silence and discredit the Washington family after they sought justice for a racially motivated assault. Judge Johnson reviewed the documentation before looking directly at Marcus. Mr. Washington, this court formally dismisses all charges against you with prejudice. The record will reflect that these allegations were not merely unsubstantiated, but deliberately fabricated as an act of retaliation. She paused, then added, the court extends its apology for the injustice you have experienced within a system meant to protect all citizens equally. As the courtroom bailiff removed Marcus's monitoring bracelet, a symbolic weight lifted from the entire proceedings. He nodded respectfully to the judge, his composure never wavering despite the momentous vindication. The case against Phillips proceeded with devastating methodicalness. Karen Winters, still bearing visible injuries from her captivity, took the stand with quiet courage. She detailed the original discrimination incident with unflinching honesty, admitting her own racial bias and describing how the airline had repeatedly protected her despite known issues. She then recounted Phillips's role in orchestrating the counter-narrative, including specific conversations where he had outlined strategies to destroy Marcus's reputation and manipulate the judicial process. Mr. Phillips told me specifically that he had spent decades building a network of judicial and prosecutorial allies for precisely these situations. Karen testified. He said, and I quote, When you own the referees, you never really lose the game. Phillips's attorneys attempted to discredit Karen through aggressive cross-examination, suggesting she was fabricating testimony to reduce her own liability. Their strategy backfired when prosecution produced the video recordings Phillips's kidnappers had made of her torture, demonstrating the lengths to which she had resisted pressure to falsely exonerate Phillips. The most dramatic moment came when a surprise witness was called. Federal Judge Harold Whitmore himself, who had originally denied Marcus bail. Initially defiant, Whitmore had ultimately accepted a cooperation agreement after being presented with irrefutable evidence of judicial misconduct. On the stand, he detailed a 20-year relationship with Phillips that included campaign contributions, paid vacations disguised as legal conferences, and direct interference in dozens of cases involving Phillips' interests. The Washington case was explicitly presented to me as a favor to Mr. Phillips, Whitmore admitted, unable to meet Marcus's gaze across the courtroom. I was instructed to keep the young man detained regardless of legal merit, to, quote, teach the family their place. As the evidence mounted incontrovertibly, Phillips made his final desperate move. During an afternoon recess, he managed to obtain a makeshift weapon from a compromised security guard. When proceedings resumed, he lunged toward Karen as she returned to the courtroom, the sharpened object raised with lethal intent. What Phillips hadn't anticipated was the intervention of his own former security chief, who tackled him before he could reach Karen. "It's over, Connor," the man said as marshals surrounded them. "I won't let you add murder to everything else." This final act of violence, witnessed by the packed courtroom and captured on security cameras, eradicated any remaining doubt about Phillips's guilt or the justice of the Washington's cause. Judge Johnson ordered Phillips removed from the courtroom and held in solitary confinement for the remainder of the trial. The verdict, when it came 2 weeks later, was comprehensive. Phillips was found guilty on all 37 counts, with Judge Johnson imposing the maximum sentence on each charge. "The court cannot overlook the extraordinary abuse of power demonstrated in this case," she declared during sentencing. The defendant used wealth and influence not only to perpetuate discrimination, but to corrupt the very legal system designed to prevent such abuses. This sentence reflects the gravity of undermining public institutions for personal prejudice. In the aftermath, the ripple effects spread throughout American institutions. National Airways faced a class action lawsuit from hundreds of discrimination victims identified through Marcus's justice-documented platform. The airline ultimately settled for over $2 billion and committed to fundamental reforms in training, reporting mechanisms, and accountability. Stanford University not only welcomed Marcus with full honors, but established the Washington Institute for Equity and Justice, dedicated to researching and addressing systemic discrimination in education. Marcus deferred his enrollment for 1 year, choosing instead to focus on expanding the justice-documented platform into a comprehensive resource for discrimination victims nationwide. The judicial system itself underwent unprecedented scrutiny. An independent commission identified 43 judges and 97 prosecutors with compromising connections to Phillips's network, leading to multiple resignations, disbarments, and criminal charges. Cases involving discriminatory patterns were reopened, resulting in overturned convictions and new safeguards against judicial manipulation. On a personal level, the most surprising development came during Marcus's last meeting with Karen Winters before the formal sentencing of Phillips. "What will you do now?" he asked her, genuinely concerned about the woman who had begun their ordeal, but ultimately helped end it. "I'm not sure," she admitted. "No airline will hire me again, and I'll always be known as the woman who slapped you. But working through my own racism and standing up to Phillips has been the most important journey of my life. I just wish I could somehow use that experience to help prevent others from following the same path." Marcus considered this thoughtfully before responding. "My father and I are establishing a corporate ethics division within Washington Technologies, focused on identifying and addressing discrimination before it becomes systemic. We need people who understand both sides of the issue, who've seen how bias works from the inside. Would you consider joining us as a trainer and consultant?" Karen's shock was evident. "After everything I did to you? You would trust me with that responsibility?" "Trust is earned," Marcus replied with the wisdom of someone far beyond his 17 years. You've begun earning it through your testimony and courage. Redemption isn't about erasing the past, but about creating a better future. I think you have something valuable to contribute to that future. 1 year after the slap that changed his life, Marcus Washington finally began his freshman year at Stanford. The experience had transformed him from a brilliant, but somewhat sheltered teenager into a powerful advocate for systemic change. His father had evolved similarly, redirecting a significant portion of his business empire toward addressing discrimination through technology, education, and legal reform. Together, they had demonstrated that justice, while neither swift nor guaranteed, remains possible even against the most entrenched systems of power and prejudice. Their story became not just about one family's fight, but about America's ongoing struggle to fulfill its founding promise of equal justice under law. As Marcus walked across the Stanford campus on his first day of classes, a student approached him hesitantly. "You're Marcus Washington, right? The one from the plane incident?" Marcus smiled. "That's part of who I am," he acknowledged. "But it's what happens next that matters most." This powerful story of Marcus Washington's journey reveals several profound truths about racism and justice in America. First, it demonstrates that racial discrimination affects people regardless of socioeconomic status. Even with billions of dollars, Elijah couldn't initially shield his son from the humiliation of being slapped for simply requesting water while flying first class. Wealth provided resources to fight back, but not immunity from prejudice. Second, we see how systems naturally protect discrimination through interconnected power structures. Karen's behavior wasn't an isolated incident, but part of a pattern the airline repeatedly covered up. When challenged, these systems deploy increasingly aggressive tactics, from character assassination to literal kidnapping, to maintain the status quo. Third, the story illustrates the immense courage required to pursue justice. Marcus and Elijah could have accepted the settlement and private apology, but recognized their responsibility to fight for systemic change that would benefit others without their resources. This decision came at enormous personal cost. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, the narrative demonstrates that meaningful change requires both individual accountability and institutional transformation. Karen's personal journey from perpetrator to ally, the airline's comprehensive reforms, Stanford's creation of the Equity Institute, and the judicial system's purging of corrupted officials all represent different facets of the multi-level change needed to address discrimination effectively. The Washington family's ultimate victory wasn't merely personal vindication, but catalyzing a broader movement that empowered countless others to seek justice through Marcus's platform. Their story reminds us that fighting discrimination isn't just about addressing individual incidents, but dismantling the systems that enable and protect such behavior. What experiences with discrimination have you witnessed or experienced, and how did you respond? Has this story changed how you might react in the future? Please share your thoughts in the comments, and if you found value in this examination of systemic racism and the courage to fight it, please like and subscribe for more stories that illuminate important social issues. Thank you for joining us on this powerful journey through injustice to redemption. May we all find the courage to stand for what's right, even when the cost is high.